similar to Ezekiel's, Isaiah, even Messiah and the Apostle Shaul. So a vision is when they look to heavens, and we of the church has really misunderstood is when we're looking into a vision. There, it's Daniel says, I was on my bed at night looking up, and so a lot of these visions are these guys are looking up into the stars, and they're looking to the pictographs, and they're telling a story from their vision and from those images. So, it talks about the two witnesses. It's talking about Gemini, and when it's talking about the 24 elders surrounding the throne, the many eyes, and these are all different pictograms around the or the Mazzaroth. And so they're reading the heavenly scroll and telling us a story and giving us symbols and parallels and things to understand about the different kingdoms. So whenever someone says, I'm looking into heaven, we've been taught and through our Christian faith as, oh, it's some mystical place above the sky, but heaven is, we can understand it, the heavenly scroll. And so when he says, as in heaven on earth, as it's written in the heavenly scroll, so may it be on the earth. So we have not understood visions and reading the heavenly scroll and understanding these different signs and what they mean and how they tell us the story of the plan of salvation. So when you say he's the word, well, the word was written in the heavens, and it tells a story throughout the Mazzaroth, throughout each Moedim, each season. There's a story to be told with Leo, the lion, the king of Judah, with Virgo, the Virgin Mary. All of these are significant and tell us a story of the word of written in the heavenly stars came into flesh, that manifested itself into flesh. And so we have the earthly scroll, and then we have the heavenly scroll. And so when we understand visions, when we understand that they're reading what's going on up in the heavens, we can understand Revelation. We can understand what Paul's talking about. We can understand what all the other prophets and priests essentially were talking about. So we always keep that heavenly mindset of, okay, what are they trying to tell us? The sign, you shall see the Son of Man coming, riding on the clouds. Is it literally the man riding on the clouds, or is Orion was considered the Son of Man in many cultures in history. So that he's like the Son of Man riding on the Milky Way. There's the signs that tell, the different things of the story that reveal truths to us on who is this person. Because in all the older cultures, different cultures throughout the world, they've had this story of a man that would come and a God man into flesh, and there are different twisted things throughout these different religions and stuff like that. But it's really just telling the story that the light before the foundation of the world, this was the Father's plan from the very beginning, to have the Son of Man that would come and slay the dragon, the Draco, rescue the bride, and that's just all written within the heavenly scroll. But yeah, there's a lot there, a lot to learn, from that. And you get some people that are doing prognostication and trying to tell the future, this and that, but really just, stay away from all that. It's just trying to understand what's written in the heavenly scroll, because they didn't always have scriptures, written down, but they had, that cannot be corrupted by anyone. Only the story can be corrupted, but the angels or any man cannot change what Yah has placed in the heavenly realm, in the heavenly scroll.
Wow, Eric, your hats are getting more flamboyant every time we see you.
I think I liked your last hat better.
Man of many hats.
This is the hat I wore in the Renaissance Fair years ago.
How many birds did you feather for that one?
Different birds we've had.
Yeah.
Pheasants and cockatoo and turkeys and parrots, various different, Anyway.
Where I guess what we're just discussing, at least I just joined in the discussion where it says we're talking about how people interpret the book of Revelation. And what people the majority of them that I've come across, if they don't understand the Torah, then they cannot properly translate the book of Revelation, because they're one and the same. It's the same person. It's like trying to say, people say, oh, we're connected to monkeys, or we're connected to this. Well, there's one creator, so there's going to be some commonalities in the creation that he's made. But they say that's why we come from monkeys or whatever, but that's not the case at all. So you're right when it comes to unless you understand all of Scripture, and as you were mentioning before, I think it was Sean saying that there was no what they call the New Testament. There was no apostolic scriptures when Messiah was first here, and what did they draw from? They drew from the Torah, the first 5 books, and then maybe some of the prophets' writings, but that's all they had to do to draw from.
I guess
so all of the examples are from there.
I just started questioning the validity of Revelation altogether. I don't know if it's helpful to even read it.
Well, at the same time, we have to try and understand, if the Creator can create the world, He can create us. Do you think that He might have been able to influence people on which books should be in the Scriptures? You know, it's pretty easy to say, well, this one doesn't belong there because we believe this or whatever. Monty Judah shot himself in the foot one time when he was talking about the book of Hebrews, saying it was not real, there was some mistakes in it, and he lost half of his people because you have to either you believe the Creator is all powerful or He's not. He gave us this book. You think that He would allow something like this, what they call the Scriptures, even though it's been translated in so many languages, there's a lot of mistakes in it. But as far as the actual contents, whether they're translated correctly or not, the contents I think are correct. That would be my opinion, anyways, because I really trust Him to give us something that we can count on, right? So whether the books are translated correctly, which I don't believe they are in a lot of cases, but as far as them being there in the order that they are, I think it really is. That's my opinion, anyways. Not everybody has to agree with it, obviously, but that's what I think.
I mean, yeah, it's a miracle that we do have what we have today as it is. But yeah, I mean, looking into other books, whether they're inspired or not, I think there's a lot more that has not been revealed to us over the years, considering Enoch and Jasher and Jubilees, and whether they're inspired or not, there definitely gives us insight into the Hebrew thought and the Hebrew mind, and I think they have value for sure.
I can remember one time sitting at Tim Hortons restaurant talking to a friend about the Scriptures, who is a Christian. I'm trying to explain to him how he should be looking at it in a little different manner. And a gentleman overheard us speaking, and he says, "What you guys, you should be talking about this book." You remember about 10 or 15 years ago, there was a book going around that Christians thought it was I forget what it was, the prayer of Jabez or something like that. It was going around.
Yep.
If you read this book, everything will be fine. And I says, well, I'm trying to teach him from this book. He says, I wouldn't trust that book, but this one is good. That book has got all kinds of lies and everything else in it. And he's talking about the Scriptures. So if you don't understand the Scriptures, I don't care how many other books you read, they're not going to be able to tell you the truth. We have to try and understand this, and then from there read the other books that will help. Because if you don't know this one, you won't know if they line up with the Scriptures. You have to learn the Scriptures first, and then see whatever else you read. If it lines up with that, then yeah, it might be inspired. It may not be inspired. It might be. But if you don't know what it says here, how will you know how to compare it? Anyways, that's what I tell most people that try to tell me about some other books. I said, once you not necessarily master, but you'll start understanding what the Scriptures say, then you can decide for yourself whatever these other books are talking about, whether they make sense or not.
There's a consideration with the book of Revelation that I believe it might have been Michael Rood brought it up. Anyway, the point is we were given these 7 Moedim plus the Sabbath day that's referenced in Leviticus 23. And to assume that they are just a list of holidays is rather trivial. To think that there's a system, there's a coded pattern within the Moedim, and that is a, you might say, a key to, on the one hand, unlock things of the kingdom, and on the other hand, to walk in the Moedim. This is part of the study of the Mishkan pattern and all, but to walk in the Moedim is almost like a routine, a dance routine, choreographed behavior. And if it is the heart of the kingdom, the Mishkan pattern, heed to the festivals, the Moedim, then it cannot be altered or done away with, in which case it's a perspective by which to see other matters in the kingdom. And so if you look at the Aleph Bet by the Moedim pattern, you'll see something that you otherwise wouldn't see. So too, if you look at the book of Revelation from the perspective of the Moedim, as if it was choreographing an itinerary, a list patterned to the sequence of the Moedim. And the Moedim could be taken as a collective or in chronological order, which is how they were given, in which case that becomes a vantage point or a lens by which to see the matters that are laid out in the book of Revelation. So I would suggest, I've talked about this on other occasions, but I would suggest that the 2,000 years of analysis that we have now about the book of Revelation, taking no consideration of the Moedim, because the Christian church at large, back in the days of the Council of Nicaea, abandoned any regard of the Moedim as being worthless and detestable practices of the Jews. That's a quote from Constantine. Said, will have nothing to do with the detestable practices of the Jews, which include the celebrating of the Moedim, the festivals. So if they are a lens by which, or an index laid over the things that are written out in Revelation, I don't know that anybody has actually ever done that study officially or publicly, or made it, you might say, taken that consideration and indexed the sequence of events in Revelation according to how they line up with the Moedim, which I've suggested, which I've started to look at, but I've never personally even completed that task. But I'm thinking that rather than throw away Revelation as being, this doesn't do anything, it's like, well, wait a minute, let's look at it in a different light, in a different perspective. There might be something there that just nobody has found because they haven't been looking correlated to the Moedim yet. I think it's a very valid consideration, especially there's 7 churches, 7 branches on menorah, 7 stars in Yeshua's hand. It's like, gee, there's 7 Moedim, the 7th day, Shabbat, 7 days in a week. There's this pattern that suggests that that's a critical regard.
Yeah, I mean, it's even, with talking about the 7 stars, it's the 7 planets as they course through each of the Moedim, each of the seasons, and breaking the seal, understanding the course of the heavenly bodies, goes through the story of what I was talking about earlier, the story of redemption of the Son of Man. So the Son of Man's holding the 7 stars, the 7 seals, as they break through each one through the courses of the heavens.
Well, we started to do a study back in Sukkot in Georgia last year regarding the Mazarot, and and again with Kerry Alexander in Oklahoma, and didn't really pull the whole thing together. It's a pretty big, complicated, complex, multi-dimensional study. And Sarah Perry there in Phoenix has a quite a regard for this, and as did John Dilday. And I've been contemplating working on this Mazarot analysis for at least 10 years. The consideration is not just to look at the Mazarot or the constellations. When Abraham was told to sephir the stars, the word sephir is where we get the word cipher, which is to encrypt or decrypt, or to look at as if it was a narrative. The word sephir also means to give shape to hair. It's also the word for frontier, which is established by a border, a perimeter of a claimed territory, and the frontiers beyond that. So if you were a military establishing a line, you'd have a series of forts, and the invisible line between them, like establishing a fence line out on your pasture land or your ranch land, you'd have posts set up and then wires strung between them. That's sephiring, connecting the dots. So when Abraham was told, I think it's Genesis 15, to sephir the stars, literally, he may have been the guy to either determine, some people say it was Enoch, some people say it was Seth, that's a whole other part of the study, but he may have been the guy to draw the lines between the stars, designing pictures, which then told a narrative story. But as John Dilday did a tremendous amount of research on this subject, he determined that what we have inherited is amalgamation of various different cultures, Greek heroes, fables, stories, and that the only way to really determine what the Mazarot are saying is to go back and compare it to the story we have in the Aleph Bet, the Aleph Tav, the Moedim, the Mishkan pattern. And it, they, E.W. Bollinger, and then somebody else called Sears, and there's been a number of other people that write books about the Mazarot, the Gospel in the Stars, Witness in the Stars, but they all basically have been copying Rolleston from the 1800s. And Rolleston, I got Rolleston's book, Francis Rolleston, and he was looking at Hebrew very, very closely to what we're doing, but he didn't regard the analysis of the letters or the Mishkan pattern the way that we're doing. So this study, call it Erictology, because it's a way of arranging the letters in such a pattern. Ayin Resh Kaf, Eric, is a way of arranging the letters in such a way that you can appreciate them in a way that wasn't done before. Mishkan pattern, Moedim, days of creation, Beatitudes, it's all the same 7-stage pattern with a prefix and a suffix of the red heifer sacrifice and the pillar of fire, pillar of smoke. So it brings in a few extra 9 places rather than just 7. But what I'm saying is that arrangement, that order, that type of study has not been applied to the Mazarot, to the book of Revelation. And so this is what makes this particular study that we're doing unique, novel, new, not plagiarized somebody else's analysis from hundreds of years ago. And what John Dilday had found was that virtually all the books written about the constellations from, you might say, a Christian perspective are ones saying, hey, it's the gospel of Jesus combating with the devil for the sake of this church. That's what everybody, including Rolleston and Bollinger, and that's kind of the basic foundational premise that they come from. But the analysis that we see in Scripture is that that's not really what it's about. What it's about is Yahweh has a covenant with Israel. When Israel listens to Yahuwah's voice and conducts his behavior accordingly to guard the words and the terms of the covenant, then Israel is successful and is the preeminent people, preeminent nation, preeminent culture on the face of the earth, this temporal planet, material. And when Israel betrays the covenant, Israel gets taken over by its enemies and is thrown into desolation for a long time until the scales are balanced, and then they're brought back into relationship the way Yahuwah had desired, which is to say this close communication between Yahuwah and Israel. That's the preeminent relationship. It's not about Jesus and the church. It's about Yahweh and Israel. So all these studies about the book of Revelation or about the constellations that are focused on Jesus and the church is a different replacement theological foundation than to do the study regarding Yahuwah and his relationship, his Brit, his eternal covenant, Brit Olam, with Israel, the collection of 12 tribes. That's this perspective that we're looking at. That's what makes it different. So to say, gosh, we're looking at the church and we've got the book of Revelation, and so Kurt, you're saying you're questioning its substance, its validity, its usefulness. It's like, well, wait a second. As they say, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Just because the bathwater is murky, there might be some value in there that is the reason it's murky to begin with. You're trying to clean the baby off and have the precious cargo. So let's before we throw anything away, let's look at it. Regarding the book of Hebrews, there's a couple statements in there which appear erroneous, wrong. And the question is, if the Bible's sacred and every word true, how can there be an error in the book of Hebrews? Monty Judah discovered this, and we could point that out and talk about it. That's a different subject than what we're going to talk about today. We're supposed to be talking about someone like 114. But what I'm saying is, when you notice a blatant error, and then if you believe that the Holy Spirit, the Ruach HaKodesh, conducted or edited the collection of books we have, the literature in the Bible that he wanted us to have on purpose, then the question is, did he want us to find the error in the book of Hebrews? Did he leave the error in there on purpose for us to bump into it and say, hey, what's this doing here? Or was it a mistake, or did somebody throw it in there as evidence that it's not supposed to be there? And so that becomes the question. And Mark, as you said, Monty Judah lost half his people that were interested in his study when he pointed that out. And it's like, well, people may not like it, but is it true? Is there a problem with the book of Hebrews? That becomes a whole nother matter. We could discuss that at some occasion. But anyway, I just came in. You guys were already talking. Did you want to get on with 114, or where are we at here?
Yes, I do. I just want to acknowledge Debbie. Hi, how are you? Glad to have you. And then Sally said, nice hat. There's people on the call that can't show up visually, but.
Oh, okay. Just to explain, I had this hat I was in the Renaissance Fair for a few years and a part of a singing group back in the mid 80s, 80, 86, 87, down in Los Angeles. Hat that I had for that festive occasion.
You were in a 1980s boy band? Is that what you're saying?
I was in a Renaissance Fair, which was recreating, it was a California living history, recreating Queen Elizabeth of England era it was a 500-year anniversary of the Spanish Armada, which had attacked England and ran into bad weather. The era of Sir Francis Drake and Shakespeare and Queen Elizabeth I and their ilk. Recreating an English town, people dressed in knights in armor, and you carry a sword at your side as a standard attire. That kind of. Anyway, it was I think people still do them, but now that with the whole COVID lockdown, they may not be doing them. But they had them all around the country, different Renaissance fairs.
Yeah, I guess we can jump into the 114 teaching and then just open up with prayer first. If somebody wants to volunteer to pray, or I'll pray, I guess. Anybody want to? Okay. Father, thank you for the opportunity to come together with my family, my Israel brothers and sisters. And just thank you for Eric's opportunity to teach the word, and that it's received and we can all learn. In Yahushua's name I pray. Amen.
So, the interesting thing about Psalm 114 is that it was really, for you mentioned it a few days ago, Kurt, and it's like, there's not a whole lot here. It's not necessarily an interesting chapter. It's rather short, which is okay. There's 8 verses, but 115 looks like there's a lot more substance.
It was actually Sally's request.
114?
Yep.
Oh, well, anyway, what I'm saying is that at face value, 114 is like, well, okay, somebody asked for it, so we'll go ahead and look at it. But really, there's not a whole lot there. It's just kind of, Some of the other ones look rather more dynamic. Like I said, in 115, talking about people who make idols become like them. And that's a study that we did a few years ago, saying the word for sawdust or wood chips or fragments that you chip off when you're sculpting a piece of stone, the fall off, the rubble, the people that make idols become as worthless as that stuff. And that's a pretty serious consideration. Imagine that if that was a hint at a real, call it a realism, a truism, that in this world you become like what you put your artistic hand to produce. Well, if you're producing idols, you become as worthless, as vain, as empty, as dead as those idols. Well, hey, we are putting our mind and our hand to these words. And if we become like these words, that's a really great thing. So it's all how you look at it. And then there's this one verse, verse 10, house of Aaron, trust in Yahweh, their help and their shield is he. So that's a statement of fact. So the idea of reading lines like that in 115 or even 116 looks like, boy, we got some substance here. But 114, here, I'll read the Stones Tanakh translation. And so I'm just trying to say, when you look at a set of verses, a chapter where it looks like, gosh, there's not much there, and it's maybe it's worth the effort. Well, I've said before that what I've found is that when you find a verse which is awkwardly translated, or one where every English translation you see seems completely different, like the professional translators are having trouble determining what this is saying, it's a good indication that there's something there that's really worthwhile. And I had that thought, gee, because this seems like there's not much there, I wonder if it'll pan out like gold panning. You get a bunch of rocks, but you end up with gold nuggets. Well, that's what happened with this chapter. There's some wonderful thing here that it'll take a little bit of analysis time to get through, but it's a great thing, actually. But I wanted to mention, I've mentioned before an author by the name of Emanuel Velikovsky. He wrote a book in the 1950s called Worlds in Collision. Real smart guy. There was no computer back then, so he had to do all his research through encyclopedias and history books and different languages of different cultures. Man, the guy put in a lot of work. He ended up writing a few different books, but this one, Worlds in Collision, he went back and he looked at verses like this. This might have been one of the actual chapters that he was looking at. And verse 6, it says, or say verse 5, it says, what ails you, O sea, that's the ocean, that you flee? O Jordan, that you turn backward, O mountains, that you skip like rams, and O hills, like young lambs. Okay, just look at that. Is that just poetry, or is that something that really happened? Well, when Israel crossed the Sea of Reeds, Yom Suf, what people call the Red Sea, during the time of the Exodus, the waters split apart and they crossed on dry land. And it had to be open for quite some time, because that's a bit of a distance. It wasn't just a few minutes, it was maybe a few hours. And then when Pharaoh and his army and their chariots and horsemen came chasing after them, and Moshe gave the signal, the waters closed back on them, it's like, what is it, if you look at the geological scientific cause and effect, we see the effect, it's in the narrative story, but what was the real cause? Now we could say, oh, it was a miracle. God's hand did it. But does he use natural events? And so Velikovsky was looking at this and say, let's suggest that he did use a natural event. What might have done this? And then when we read that the hills and mountains jumped around. Well, hills and mountains don't jump around, so that must be poetry. Well, wait a minute. The Jordan, the word Jordan, Yod Resh Dalet Nun, literally means descending. So here you have water descending downhill because water flows downhill. And the Jordan goes from the Sea of Galilee to the Dead Sea because it's downhill. And for the Jordan River to go backwards, did something happen to raise the elevation of the Dead Sea or to lower the elevation of the Sea of Galilee for a while so that the river actually started flowing backwards? Well, how do you lift an entire continent? I don't know how many feet in the air, 100 feet in the air, maybe more. I mean, I don't know what the fall of the Jordan River is. But that's the only way the Jordan River is going to flow backwards, unless there's some kind of an other power like electromagnetics. I mean, if it's gravity, the land has to raise up. If there's some sort of electromagnetics at play that we don't know anything about, or some sort of angels and demons goofing around with messing with physics and chemistry, that's a different matter. But Immanuel Velikovsky started looking into this, and what he determined is that something was happening with another planet coming into the proximity, very close proximity of the Earth, and that there was a discharge of electromagnetic plasma, energy, fire bolts discharged between Earth, and it was either Mars or it was Venus or the planet Nibiru, planet X. That's a whole nother conversation. But what Velikovsky determined was going on, that this chapter is regarding, is a real event. Imagine taking a carpet and say the carpet's kind of large. Let's say it's a 10 by 10, 10 feet by 10 feet. You can't just pick it up and shake it like a bed sheet, but it's heavy. It's got weight and mass. And if you were to take it outside because it wasn't nailed down and you wanted to shake it out because there was dirt in it, you could pick it up and whoo, and you'd get this ripple. Well, he was saying that's what happened to the surface of the Earth at the time this planet came close to the planet Earth. And that's what made the mountains skip like rams and the hills like young lambs. He's saying this is not poetry. This was a real event. That's also him saying this, you know how like if you take a balloon and you rub it and it builds up this static electricity, it makes your hair stand up. He was saying that's what made the walls of the water stand up, crossing the Sea of Reeds in the Exodus, and that's also the type of thing that made the Jordan River back up or flow backwards. That it was all physics, geological events that we just don't have any record of. It's not poetic. That's what Velikovsky said. So that makes it interesting. So anyway, here, let me just read it in English real quick. Stone's Tanakh. When Israel went out of Egypt, Jacob's household, from a people of alien tongue, Judah became his sanctuary, Israel his dominions. What does that mean? The sea saw and fled. The Jordan turned backward. The mountains skipped like rams. The hills like young lambs. What ails you, O sea, that you flee? O Jordan, that you turn backward? O mountains, that you skip like rams? O hills, like young lambs? Before the Lord's presence did I, the earth, tremble, before the presence of the God of Jacob, who turns the rock into a pond of water, the flint into a flowing fountain. That's it. That's the end of Psalms 114. So 2 verses are talking about the mountains and the hills and the sea and the Jordan, and then 2 other verses are repeating it and saying it's almost poetic, but he's saying, gee, why did that happen? And then it's as if, again, poetic, as if the earth is answering and saying, oh, it was in the presence of the Elohim of Yaakov. But what has that got to do with the first verse that says Yaakov's household exodus out of Egypt from a people of alien tongue? What does bringing the concept, the factor of an alien tongue into this format, what has that got to do with anything? And then verse 8, the Elohim of Yaakov, who turns the rock into a pond of water. How can you have a rock turn into a pond of water? Now, Ron Wyatt, and since then, his name Jim Cornicky and a few other people have gone over Saudi Arabia, found Jabal al-Laz, as it's called, the mountaintop, which is called Mount Sinai. And they have found this big rock. Kurt, maybe you could find a picture of it. This big giant rock, which is split down the middle and has the evidence that many, call them gallons or tons of water flowed through that. And there's a big area with a pool. And so people are convinced that that was that people have gone over there to Saudi Arabia and found this place. Another friend, Pete, I believe, found up in South Dakota another rock that looks almost identical to this one in Saudi Arabia. It's really interesting, but the rock was split and water had poured out. You call it archaeological evidence. It's right there. The evidence is in the stone. But to say the flint, it's not flint. Maybe it's granite, but why does it say flint? Into a flowing fountain. The rock didn't turn into, so why is it said like this? Oh, well, maybe this is poetry. Again, is this just poetry? Is this bad translation? There's really interesting things going on in the Hebrew, which we'll get into right now. But before that, I mean, there's a number of people on the talk here. I don't know who's here because we don't have their pictures up, but is there anything that anybody wanted to say addressing this chapter before we get into the analysis here? You'd have to.
Hi, everybody. So, Eric, the reason for the interest in the study of this specific verse came from a song I heard by an Israeli group called Mikadim, and they performed this song. And as I was listening to it, a few different times driving or sitting around, I started to have this kind of understanding, and it was completely sung in Hebrew. But I just started having this understanding of like the alphabet coming into our world, being taught to us, and everything moving out of its way. And that's kind of in a little snippet what I was kind of sensing when I was listening to this song. So I thought, wow, that's awesome. So I thought about offering that up as a suggestion to have it as a topic, if or just pay attention to it. So but yeah, I really enjoyed this song. I'm going to share it if anybody wants to listen to it. They did a really nice job, and it's all sung in Hebrew. And anyway, but
so they're singing the whole chapter. There's 8 verses.
I went through it. They sang every single, like, it's all in order. They repeat the section. I think it's like the 3rd verse, the first or the last couple of, I have to look at it again, but they repeat a couple of words in their like chorus, but the whole song is word by word. I mean, they follow the whole psalm. So
yeah, it'd be nice to hear that. Like I said, verse 3 and 4 is repeated as verse 5 and 6, where it says the sea and the Jordan went backward, the mountains and the hills jumped around, and then it says, why are you? And then it says it again. So that's kind of a poetic lyricist format, you might say.
Right. But I had such an incredible, like, kind of moment listening to the song, and I kept playing it over and over again because I wanted to be right there again, where that kind of understanding was happening with me, where I was watching or having an understanding of the alphabet, his word coming into the atmosphere, kind of like, and being taught like it's being done, and everything moving away from it. It's like nothing can stand against that. Like, it's just, it was really awesome. So that's, I just enjoyed it so much. I think I shared it on the chat, but I'll send it to Kurt. Maybe he can put a link or something at the video. It's really cool.
Also, Eric, all these events that I'm speaking of here were actually events that happened. Them leaving Egypt, and when it speaks of the people of a strange language, it could be the language of their gods, it could be their doctrine. Judah and his sanctuary, and Israel is dominion. And then when it sees about the mountains shaking, it could be talking about the earthquakes that were happening in those days that Yahweh made happen. And when it talks about the Jordan going back, when they crossed through the Jordan, the water went back. And as far as the sea and so on and so forth, and it's all actual events if you research it in the scriptures. And someone, the psalmist, whoever the psalmist was, if it was David or whatever, knew of those events, and he put it into a flowery language.
Well, I mean, the scriptures do say that an east wind blew the waters back. So I don't know about the electromagnetic, I mean, possibly combination of that, but the waters were split with an eastern wind all night.
Right. That must even a hurricane won't exactly open waters nowadays. But, you know, I think it was a couple years ago, there was such a hurricane somewhere on the Gulf of Mexico, I think it was, that so much water went up into the sky and got dumped on the land that there were, I think it wasn't a lake, I think it was a bay, that all the water was gone. Boats were sitting on the floor of the ocean. Docks were completely high and dry. Seashells were on the ground. And it's like, where'd all the water go? It's almost like the entire level of the ocean dropped by 15 feet or something.
Yeah, we see that in like tsunamis. Water gets drawn back and into the ocean right before the big wave.
Yeah, but this, I remember seeing it on the I think it was on the internet. There was these photos, and it said, where'd the water go? It wasn't just like this one moment. It was like that for quite some time, and they believed it was because so much water was sucked up by the hurricane and dumped on the land, and it came back. But so was it something like that created the passage of the Red Sea, Yom Suf? Hi, Gilin.
Hello. Sorry. Had some visitors, sorry.
Oh, that's okay. So we're just about ready to get into Psalm 114. And the question was, is there anything that anybody wanted to make a comment on before we got into it here?
Yes, I do.
Hi,
Eric.
Is that Paul Barry?
It's Paul Barry.
Good to see you.
Of course. Thank you, Eric. When Israel went out of Egypt, thank you, Kurt. Thank you for the message. I would have missed it. When Israel went out of Egypt, the house of Yaakov, from the people of a strange language. Was it strange to the people of Jacob, the language of Egypt? They had their Paleo language, and Egypt language was strange. And where's the remote? Who is
Sorry, your voice is cutting out.
Whose sanctuary? And the hand off the microphone. Yehuda was his sanctuary. Whose sanctuary was Yehuda? Yahuwah was Yahuwah's sanctuary. This is what I see in this verse.
That word sanctuary is Kodesh, right?
Yes.
It's set apart one.
I
Yeah.
believe so. Yes.
Paul, if you're speaking, your microphone just went mute.
There's another way to read all this, which I'll get into. But anyway, yeah, go ahead, Paul.
Yeah. Okay. It's in verse 2. Yehuda was his sanctuary. whose sanctuary was Yehuda for? Was it Yahuwah? You know, was Yahuwah actually in these people? And, you know, their actions, I see their actions has caused what the rest of the chapter says, just like I believe Yahuwah is waiting for the manifestations of the sons of Elohim in the last days to change things. I mean, we want to get on and do the works. This all might sound very charismatic and Pentecostal, which is my past, but here I see the children of Jacob making these happen because they contain Yahuwah amongst them, if that makes any sense. So that's how I read this chapter, and it blew me away. I did send it to Torah Family up in Nose Hill page, Eric, and it's just a blessing to me.
See, that's a critical consideration, which we will hopefully address after getting through 114, is that I was speaking with someone last night, hey Wesley, and the idea that there's other books, there's other philosophies, there's other sages, gurus, Buddhist, Islamic, Muslim, Hindu, different cultures around the world, whether it's religious or national, and they have some smart things to say. They have some insights. Some are clever, some are poignant, some are scientific, but there's something about including or dragging Yahuwah's name into our consciousness, into our philosophy, into our ideologies, which is a game changer. In Daniel chapter 9, which is another part, I don't know if we'll get into it today, but Daniel says, hey, it's not because we're righteous, or it's not because we're so smart, or not because we have any reason that you should save us. We've been wicked and sinful and doing horrible things, but because your name, Yahuwah, because your name is called upon your people and your city, please come in and help us and save us, because we are your heritage, and whatever happens to us is going to go back onto your credit, your face, your reputation, your Shem. And for us to be the people that grab a hold of his Shem, his name, his reputation, and cling to it and write it on our shirt, put it on our hat saying, hey, I'm calling on this name. This name is what I'm about. And if you offend me, you're offending him. And if you disparage me, this is who you're disparaging, Yod He Vav He. Suddenly that's going to drag him into it. And you'll see all through scripture that David even says, not for our sake, but for your name's sake. There's something about that name of Yahuwah which pulls him into the equation. And all these other philosophies, insights, scientific determinations, art, whatever you want to call it, if it doesn't include him, though they may be right or accurate in their assessments of what's life on earth, how do Napoleon Hill, I think you mentioned Wesley there, and a few others that have great insights of strategies. It's different to bring Yahuwah into it. And the study of the Aleph Tav, the 22 alphabet letters, is not a matter of clever analysis of strategy. It's about who is Yahweh, what did he say, and how does he involve himself, particularly with his people Israel. Again, that's what makes this particular study different than other studies of other subjects. This is about Yahuwah in his relationship with Israel. That's what this is about. Okay, anyway, is there anybody else that wanted to say anything about this chapter before we get into it? No? Okay, well, let's jump into Psalms 114, first verse. And again, just for the sake of assisting or facilitating whoever wants to study this way, just going through word for word, letter for letter. The last couple weeks we did 40 verses. The Song of Deborah, the Song of, the prayer of Habakkuk. This is only 8, so it might go a little easier. A couple of the verses are repeated. So, but anyway.
Eric, we're almost at an hour, so I'm going to stop and then hit record, and then the second part of the video will be.
Okay.
Matter. All right. Sorry.